Is the petrodollar cracking? If it is, the consequences won't begin with dramatic headlines. They won't begin with declarations of collapse. They will begin quietly, in inflation that lingers longer than expected, in energy prices that behave differently, in capital flows that shift direction, in the subtle instability of entire economies. For nearly 50 years, global financial power has rested on a simple structural rule. Oil is traded in dollars. Most public discussions focus on geopolitics at the surface level, wars, alliances, leaders, summits, but modern power does not operate primarily at the surface. It operates at the settlement layer, through reserve currencies, through energy contracts, through clearing systems and financial plumbing most citizens never see. And that invisible layer is shifting. To understand whether the petrodollar is cracking, reduce the system to three core components: energy demand, dollar settlement, security guarantees. Remove any one of these and the structure changes. The structural origin. In 1971, the United States ended the gold standard. For decades, the dollar had been convertible into gold. That convertibility anchored global trust. When it ended, the question became immediate and urgent. If a currency is no longer backed by gold, what anchors global demand? The answer was not philosophical. It was structural: oil. By the mid-1970s, major oil producers priced crude in dollars. Energy importing nations needed oil. To buy oil, they needed dollars. That requirement created permanent global demand. Countries accumulated dollar reserves not out of ideological alignment, but operational necessity. Oil exporters accumulated large dollar surpluses and reinvested them into U.S. financial markets. Treasury bonds, equities, and dollar-denominated assets. This recycling process became known as the petrodollar system. It wasn't a single treaty or dramatic announcement. It was an alignment of incentives. Energy demand generated dollar demand. Dollar demand financed U.S. deficits. Security partnerships reinforced energy pricing norms. The system stabilized itself. For decades, it worked. The hidden layer of power. The petrodollar system did more than facilitate oil trade. It embedded the dollar into global finance. When oil is priced in dollars, shipping insurance clears in dollars. Energy derivatives settle in dollars. Sovereign reserves accumulate in dollars. Over time, the dollar became not just a trade currency, but the reserve currency. That status created advantages: lower borrowing costs, deep capital markets, global liquidity dominance, the ability to impose financial sanctions with systemic reach. Because when settlement flows through your currency, enforcement flows through your institutions. But every system built on centralization carries risk, not because it is fragile, but because it is conditional. When settlement becomes conditional, financial systems rely on trust, but they also rely on neutrality. When reserves can be frozen, when clearing systems can be restricted, when access to payment infrastructure becomes politicized, the system reveals its conditional nature. Sanctions are powerful precisely because the dollar is central, but every use of that power carries a signal. The signal is simple. Participation is not guaranteed. For nations watching from the outside, that signal matters. It doesn't trigger immediate abandonment, but it encourages hedging, and hedging reduces exclusivity. The quiet diversification. The shift away from exclusivity is not dramatic, it is incremental. China settles portions of its energy trade in yuan. Russia trades energy outside Western settlement systems. Central banks increase gold reserves at the fastest pace in decades. Bilateral currency swap agreements expand. None of these moves replace the dollar, but they reduce dependence. That distinction matters. Systems rarely collapse because they are attacked directly. They weaken because they are diversified away from. Diversification does not require revolution. It requires alternatives. Gold as insurance. Consider gold. Gold does not depend on clearing systems. It carries no counterparty risk. It cannot be digitally frozen. When central banks accumulate gold, they are not necessarily rejecting the dollar. They are insuring against conditionality. Gold becomes attractive not because it is superior in daily transactions, but because it is neutral. Neutrality has value when settlement systems become politicized. The rise in global gold accumulation suggests one thing clearly. States are preparing for optionality. Optionality is not abandonment, but it signals reduced confidence in singular reliance. Energy demand is changing. Another pressure point is structural. The original petrodollar logic depended on oil's centrality, but global energy markets are evolving. Renewables are expanding. Natural gas markets are regionalizing. Electric vehicle adoption reduces certain oil dependencies. Energy trade routes diversify. Oil will not disappear. It remains foundational to global industry. But if oil's dominance declines relative to broader energy mixes, then the automatic link between oil demand and dollar demand may weaken over time. Not suddenly, gradually. Multipolar pressure. Today, global finance shows early signs of multipolarity. The dollar still dominates. It remains the primary reserve currency, the main invoicing currency, and the deepest liquidity pool in global markets. But exclusivity is no longer absolute. The euro plays a role. The yuan expands regionally. Digital currencies are being tested by central banks. Commodity-backed trade discussions resurface in emerging markets. The key question is not whether the dollar disappears. It is whether it remains the singular center of gravity, or becomes one major pole among several. Multipolar currency systems are historically less stable, but they distribute leverage, and distribution reduces concentrated power. Security guarantees and the energy link. The third pillar of the petrodollar system was security alignment. Energy-producing nations often relied on U.S. security guarantees. That alignment reinforced dollar pricing norms. But geopolitical relationships evolve. Strategic hedging is now visible even among long-standing partners. Energy exporters explore broader diplomatic ties. Military procurement diversifies. Regional alliances strengthen. None of this signals immediate rupture, but it signals flexibility, and flexibility erodes rigidity. Adaptation versus erosion. So is the petrodollar cracking? Cracking implies fracture, a sudden structural break. There's little evidence of that. The dollar remains dominant in global reserves and trade settlement, but centrality is not binary. It can weaken without collapsing. If a system shifts from 80% dominance to 60% dominance over decades, it still survives, but its leverage declines. The United States benefits from issuing the world's reserve currency. It finances deficits more easily. It attracts capital during crises. It influences global liquidity cycles. If centrality weakens, those advantages compress, not vanish. Compress. That compression shows up in borrowing costs, in currency volatility, in reduced sanction efficiency, in slower capital inflows, subtle changes with large aggregate impact. The long horizon. Financial systems evolve slowly. The gold standard did not disappear overnight. Bretton Woods did not collapse instantly. The petrodollar did not emerge in a single moment. Structural shifts unfold across decades. What we are witnessing may not be a crack. It may be early-stage diversification, but diversification changes leverage, and leverage shapes outcomes. So the question is not whether the petrodollar collapses tomorrow. It is whether the dollar remains indispensable in 2030, 2040, and beyond. Because once exclusivity fades, restoring it becomes nearly impossible. Systems rarely return to singular dominance once alternatives prove viable. And in global finance, viability is enough. The petrodollar may not be cracking dramatically, but the world is quietly testing what life looks like without its monopoly. And that test, more than any headline, will determine what comes next.